With the Premier League being one of the most intense leagues in the world, the pressure can often make players do things they quickly regret. From avoidable assaults to whole team brawls, today we're going to look at 12 times footballers lashed out in the Premier League. Stick around until the end to see what happened in one of the dirtiest games ever played in England, and to see the most ridiculous sending off in Prem history. Robin van Persie pushes his luck. Being sent off for lashing out is one thing, but doing it as a substitute is a different level of disappointing. Arsenal striker Robin van Persie committed the deadly sin when he was sent off in a 2-1 loss against Stoke City. The Dutch talisman was subbed on in the 65th minute, tasked with getting Arsenal back into the game, in which they were 2-0 down. However, Stoke's goalkeeper Thomas Sorensen had other ideas. The Danish keeper goaded Van Persie into pressuring him. Just as he picked up the ball, the striker lunged into Sorensen and sent him crashing to the ground. It was perhaps the most unnecessary push in Premier League history. Referee Rob Styles had no choice but to give Van Persie his marching orders just 12 minutes after he was subbed onto the pitch. Eric Cantona's Kung Fu Kick. One insanely impulsive moment stands out over the rest, and it's not surprising that it comes from one of the most iconic players in Premier League history. Crystal Palace hosted Manchester United in January 1995. With United 1-0 up, Cantona threw a kick at Eagles defender Richard Shaw after a foul was not given his way. It earned him a red card just 4 minutes into the second half. However, it wouldn't be his last kick of the afternoon. As Cantona walked towards the tunnel, a Palace fan allegedly started shouting racial abuse at the Frenchman. With almost no hesitation, Cantona jumped straight at the fan with both feet in the air. He channeled his inner Bruce Lee with a kung fu kick that wouldn't have looked out of place in Mortal Kombat. Cantona was banned from playing football for 9 months 2 days later, and was fined £20,000 for his assault. The Battle of Stamford Bridge. We talked about the tensions of Derby Day earlier on, and it's no surprise that sometimes games can spiral into complete scrambles. One of the best examples of this was a clash between Chelsea and Tottenham in May 2016, where Spurs had to win to stop Leicester from winning the league. Chelsea hosted league title hopefuls Tottenham, and Spurs had to win in order to stop Leicester City from winning the Premier League. Spurs went 2-0 up in the first half, but a tackle from Danny Rose in injury time changed the atmosphere of the game. It resulted in one of the dirtiest games in Premier League history. Chelsea striker Diego Costa tried to gouge out Rose's eye, which led to a multi-man melee that Spurs manager Mauricio Pochettino ended up getting involved with. Eric Lamela deliberately trod on Cesc Fabregas's hand in the second half, while Diego Costa wound up the Spurs players all game, brawling with Jan Vertonghen several times. Chelsea scored 2 through all of the chaos, drawing the game at 2-2. And as the final whistle went, a post-match brawl occurred once it had set in that Spurs could no longer win the Premier League. However, despite all of the chaos, nobody received a red card. Luis Suarez bites off more than he can chew. Some acts of violence in the Premier League are justified outbursts which come after hours of torment between rivals, but others, well, some moments just can't really be explained. As Liverpool chased an equaliser against Chelsea in 2013, striker Luis Suarez and Chelsea defender Branislav Ivanovic scrapped in the box. The tussle ended up with Suarez biting a chunk out of Ivanovic's right shoulder. Bizarrely, referee Kevin Friend didn't see Suarez bite the Serbian. The Uruguayan striker was not sent off, and he would then go on to score the equalising goal for Liverpool 7 minutes into injury time. Suarez was retrospectively handed a 10-match ban from the FA days later. It was not the first time he'd bitten a player, as he'd done the same whilst captaining Ajax 3 years earlier. It would also not be the last, as he famously sunk his teeth into Chiellini's shoulder at the 2014 World Cup. United tunnel their rage. Sometimes the lashing out starts before the players even get onto the pitch. Sparks flew prior to the first whistle between United and Arsenal in 2003, as Patrick Vieira and Roy Keane had an infamous spat in the tunnel before the game. The contempt eventually climaxed when Ruud van Nistelrooy won a last-minute penalty. Arsenal were convinced he had dived for it and were furious with the decision. However, the Dutchman missed the penalty, which immediately had him surrounded by 6 Gunners players. This included Martin Keown, who jumped up and hit Van Nistelrooy on the top of the head. The United players then stormed in and a huge 22-man brawl proceeded. Revenge for Roy Keane. Roy Keane and Alf Inge Haaland were involved in one of the most bitter and personal rivalries in the early 2000s. In 1997, Haaland mocked Keane's cruciate ligament injury and claimed that he was faking the pain. Keane wouldn't forget that. In 2001, he lashed out at Haaland and got his revenge. He went smashing into the Norwegian, going in studs up and directly into his right knee. Keane was sent off and given a 3-match ban instantly. The tackle didn't cause Haaland's retirement, contrary to what legend says, but it was enough to have Keane see further punishment. He was fined a combined total of £155,000 over the years for the challenge. Nunez uses his nut. Lashing out isn't one of the best ways to introduce yourself in the Premier League. That's unfortunately what new Liverpool starlet Darwin Nunez did very early on in his Reds career. In his first start against Crystal Palace, Nunez was kept on a leash all game by defender Joachim Andersen. The Danish defender provoked Nunez a total of 10 times, and anger was building with every single tackle, block or interception that Andersen made. Andersen eventually tipped the iceberg by pushing Nunez in the back of the head, which led to the player turning around and headbutting Andersen almost instinctively. The Palace man went flying to the floor, and Nunez was of course shown a straight red card. Aguero acts out of character. Sergio Aguero and David Luiz had a serious personal rivalry throughout their Premier League careers. They committed several shock tackles on each other over the years, but one freak challenge stands out from the rest. City were 3-1 down to Chelsea in 2016, and Aguero was chasing away back into the title race 6-pointer. He took a heavy touch and lost control of the ball, and Luiz ran across to commit a fair tackle, but Aguero instead chose violence. He smashed his left leg high into Luiz's thigh. It was an out-of-character red card for the Argentinian, his one and only Premier League sending off. A scuffle then obviously ensued between the two teams. It ended with Fernandinho grabbing Cesc Fabregas by the throat, pushing him over the advertising boards. He too received a straight red card, leaving Pep Guardiola seething at the stupidity of two of his key players. Fellaini loses and uses his head. Some players have a history of being a little too violent, and sparks always seem to fly further when it comes to Derby Day. Tensions rose in the Manchester Derby in 2017, where Sergio Aguero got the better of Marouane Fellaini. The Belgian was booked for a foul on Aguero, and just 16 seconds later he tripped him over again for another City free kick. It led to the two players confronting each other before Fellaini took the spat a step further and headbutted the Argentine striker. Experienced referee Martin Atkinson had no time for the incident and immediately sent Fellaini to the dressing room. Two Magpies start a cockfight. Perhaps the only thing worse than being sent off in injury time is being sent off for lashing out at your own teammate. Newcastle took on Aston Villa in April 2005, with the Magpies floundering in mid-table at the tail end of the season. After already having a player sent off, Lee Bowyer confronted Kieran Dyer for intentionally not passing him the ball. Their flailing frustrations eventually came to a boil. Words were exchanged and punches soon followed. Both were sent off after their bewildering bust-up, which left Newcastle with just 8 players on the pitch. Newcastle had already conceded 2 penalties in the match, and manager Graham Souness was left gobsmacked as the two continued to fight down the tunnel. Thatcher's iron elbow. It's very rare that a foul on a football pitch leads to a full-blown police investigation, but Man City's Ben Thatcher somehow did that, with the most brutal lash-out in Premier League history. Running onto a loose ball, Thatcher decided that he wasn't even going to attempt to control it. He ploughed his elbow into Pedro Mendes' skull. Mendes fell to the floor unconscious and slid into the advertising boards. He then had a seizure on the pitch, was stretchered off with oxygen, and slept in hospital that night. Yet despite all of that, referee Dermot Gallagher only gave Thatcher a yellow card. Punishment soon came, however, as City fined their own player 6 weeks of wages. The FA also banned Thatcher for 8 games. It remains the hardest sanctions ever dealt to a player over a single foul in English football history. Yusuf Mulumbu's moment of madness. We promised the most ridiculous sending off in Prem history, and it has to undoubtedly be this one. West Brom midfielder Yusuf Mulumbu saw red mist and a red card in the 90th minute with one of the most bizarre acts of violence. The Baggies were playing West Ham at Upton Park. Mulumbu was irate for not being awarded a free kick after a challenge from Gary O'Neill. The Congolese midfielder was never going to leave the matter there. He picked up the ball and drop-kicked it straight at O'Neil. Mulumbu's simple-minded strike led to a straight red from referee Andre Mariner. West Brom were already losing 3-1 at the time, so it wasn't like Mulumbu was stopping a counter-attack or doing it for his team. He literally missed 3 games for absolutely no reason.